Hello and welcome to week 10 of CIT 15. We have gone from the single digits to the double digits, right? We were in week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 single digits, and now we are in week 10 double digits. And when I was starting this video, that kind of struck me as pretty significant. And I wanted to say, congratulations to you. You're doing it. You are doing it. Right? Like week 10, you're more than halfway there. You've made it over the top of the mountain. Now, literally, in some ways, it's all downhill. Hopefully not in terms of quality, but in terms of work, right? Like this course is preloaded with all of the heavy work at the beginning of the course. And so, now we're just, if you're keeping up with pace, most of the stuff in Canvas is done. And we definitely have some things to knock out in my IT lab. So we're going to look at that. That's the first thing, what you should be doing this week. That's the first thing we're going to look at. And then the second thing we're going to look at is some new lecture content. I'm going to talk about some stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and knock that out. Here's what you should be doing this week in Canvas. You should go in and do all of your assignments through week 10. This still says week 9. It will say week 10 soon, right? But through week 10, do all of your assignments. So let's go take a look at those and see what those assignments might be. Let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. There we go, that's better. And I did that with Control plus and Control minus, the shortcut key for zooming in a browser. So week 10, you have programming, conditional logic. I hope you're enjoying those programming videos and little exercises are kind of fun. And then you also have Google Scholar, which is cool. So for doing academic research or finding scholarly articles, there's Google Scholar, which is super neat. And then we have a discussion. And for week 10 discussion, what do we got? Jamie, how the mysterious darknet is going mainstream. So this is an older TED Talks, and the darknet hasn't really gone mainstream like the way this guy was talking about. But it's super interesting. It's a super interesting TED Talk. And the darknet is still very much there. So I really recommend watching this. Yeah, this is like, 5 years ago? So check it out. That's a good one. In my IT lab, week 10, this is week 1. This is week 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is week through 9. And so now we go into our first week of Access. So do the first Access exam. Inside this exams folder, you should have done through Chapter 10 quizzes, and then also Office hands-on tests, Word, and Excel. Those should be done. Okay? And if you want to start taking the final, you can do that anytime you want. Take it as many times as you want. It always keeps your most recent score. So you can try and try again until you get a score you like. All right. With that said, this week the textbook chapter that we're going to talk about is Chapter 10, Software Programming. But before we do that, we're going to spend a little bit of time about looking at multimedia. And so that's kind of like what I talk about week 10. So that's what's on the docket. Okay? So now we're going to move into the lecture portion of all this. I'm just making sure I'm recording. I have forgotten, it seems like, probably to hit record. Like that one time I recorded the whole lecture like this and you couldn't see anything that I was talking about. That was a bummer, but this is much better. So multimedia. So multimedia is mini media, and if you think about like original forms of communication in the beginning, right, we had the spoken word and language, and so that is a type of media. Sound is a medium. Sound is a medium, and language, the spoken word, is the media, right? Sound is the medium, language is the media. And that's how we conveyed stuff. And we had orators who remembered entire books, like the Odyssey, the Iliad, right? And they would have this, I don't know what they call it, the oratory tradition or something like that. You take a history class, they'll tell you about it. But that was like how we first kind of conveyed information. And then we also conveyed information, stored information by writing on cave walls. So we still find that stuff on cave walls. And so we're doing this little introduction to multimedia just so you have some appreciation for the amazing way information is presented today. Because back in the day, right? It wasn't like it is today. Caveman did not have iPhone. though iPhone might be making human more like caveman. You know, we walk around slunched over, right, looking at our cell, looking at our cell phone. There's a funny Trevor Noah cell phone video, and cell phones are robbing us. Cell phone monkey. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, you might be able to find it. Maybe it's that one. Cell phones are robbing us. I don't know which one it is, but it's pretty funny about how we're kind of regressing in some ways with our cell phones. So anyhow, first there was the spoken word and cave drawings, and then at some point, you know, in our evolution, we came up with the printing press. And so the printing press was developed, printing press like in the 1000 AD, printing press. And so printing press is a mechanical device, printing press Wikipedia, printing press. So we're looking for, like, you know, Gutenberg printing press, Gutenberg printing press year. There we go. 1440, right, came up with this printing press. But before that, we had the, what was it? Anyhow, the printing press came along, and it allowed, instead of people writing things down on paper, it allowed those books to be reproduced, right? And in the book, there might also be pictures. And so now we had a different medium. We not only had sound, or the medium of the cave wall. Now we had paper, and we were writing on paper and creating books, and that's one of the ways we were storing information and conveying information. Paper, ink on paper, words, drawings, right? So that was the medium, and the media was the written word, the book, right? And then the printing press allowed those to be mass-produced. And so I sometimes refer to the printing press as the first information revolution. And the first information revolution was that books could be mass-produced. So that meant that people had more access to information information was more readily accessible. And so within 200 years of the invention of the printing press, we had a flourishing in the arts and the sciences. And so we had the scientific revolution, and we also had the Renaissance. And so some historians correlate the invention of the printing press and the wider access to information with the scientific revolution and the Renaissance, right? So this information revolution, people having access to information, led to a richer science, richer society, led to a flourishing in the arts and a flourishing in the sciences. And so that was, the first information revolution, which begs the question, with the second information revolution, which is the internet, will we also see a flourishing in the arts and the sciences? And arguably, I think we could say that, yeah, we're already seeing exponential increase over the last 25 years that the internet and the World Wide Web's been around. And just the access to information and the ability of people to gain information is pretty amazing. So that's a new way, multimedia, right? A new way that we were able to convey information was through books. And then at some point we invented the radio, and then the television, and movies, and then the internet and the World Wide Web. And as these different things, and magazines, and as these different things came along, we started to add more pieces of media into the way we're conveying information. And so the medium might be video, the medium might be sound, the medium might be something that we see, a book or a magazine, right? And then the media that goes into that, we might have images, we might have text, we might have, if it's a video, right, we might have sound, all of that combined, moving images, pictures, sound, spoken word, words that we read. So we can combine all these different pieces of media to make really dynamic content and to convey messages in a very short period of time. And it's interesting to see how psychologically we have adapted and grown. I'm not going to say evolved, because evolution takes, generally speaking, an extraordinary long period of time. But by growing up with this stuff, each generation kind of gets acquainted with things in a different way, and their minds adapt to use the tools of the environment in which they're born, right? So it's one thing to be a native to certain tools. It's another thing to kind of come at those tools partway through your life. And so when you're born, and this is the way the world is, and you're native to these tools, you're a digital native to cell phones, then that's something you've always known. And like your kids are using it from the day, from a very young age, and right, learning how to, and so it's just part of their experience of the world. Older people are like, what? How's it work? What? Right? And so they're not natives. And so each generation that grows up with something, they have better skills with it, and they adapt to that environment. And so all that is to say that we've definitely grown and changed as a species, and the access to information is incredible, and the way we could convey information is incredible. And if you look at YouTube and you look at like old coffee commercial, like 1950 coffee commercial, like these commercials will just bore you to death. Folgers coffee commercial, bad taste, vintage advertising. It's a minute long. And there's like a whole little narrative and movie, and the husband's not happy with the wife because she didn't make good coffee, and she's very concerned. Her husband's upset. What could she do different? And then, the husband is just like a surly, chauvinistic, jingoistic. I gotta look up what that word means. What's jingoistic mean? Gotta make sure I have the right meaning on it. I might have just said a bad word. Jingoistic, define. Characterized by extreme patriotism, especially in the form of aggressive or warlike foreign policy. Yeah, that's not so much conveyed in the commercial. Chauvinistic, but chauvinism is right. Feeling, displaying aggressive or displaying excessive prejudice, support for one's own cause, group, or sex. Yeah, chauvinistic. So jingoistic could kind of fit into that, especially in the form of aggressive or warlike foreign policy. So jingoistic's more about a nation, and chauvinistic can be about, pride, prejudice for one's group, cause, or gender. So that's, anyhow, go watch one of these commercials because they'll shock you. And then you could compare that to like GoPro commercial, And so you could go look at one of these GoPro commercials. I don't know, they're all long too, but they pretty much rock. And yeah, amazing, a lot happening. Or a Super Bowl commercial, right? You could go Super Bowl commercial and just kind of watch one. Like what Super Bowl, Tim Best, I just want one. Anyhow, watch one of the commercials. Like things happen a lot quicker. It's a lot snappier. There's a lot more media. The cuts are quicker. The cuts per minute, like that you see, are a lot faster. So we're taking in information a lot more quickly. Anyhow, multimedia, this introduction, is this idea that multi is many in media. And how do we use all these different media? How do we use all this different media, video, audio, pictures, the written word, printing press? How do we use all this different media? How do we combine it together to convey a message? Multimedia. Okay? It's something that's worthy to reflect upon. And then we have, when we get into multimedia and we start to look at the different types of media, we have pictures, right? Images. And so with images, we have, again, a coding scheme. So everything ultimately comes down to zeros and ones in a computer. Computers run on electricity. Electricity can be on or off, right? On or off. And then we could create a coding scheme so that on-off state means something. So if the porch light's on, come trick or treat. If the porch light's off, go away. And so we could also say, hey, if this circuit, the switch is in on position, it means black, or if it's in off position, it means green. And so we could store the color information for something, right? And so with a screen, so you're looking at a screen right now, and this screen has an aspect ratio, whatever screen you're looking at. And so a letterbox aspect ratio or a cinematic aspect ratio is going to be like 16:9. And so that's 16 pixels over for every 9 pixels up or down. So it's more wide, 16 pixels over, than it is tall, 9 up or down. Another aspect ratio is more of a square, 4:3. Right? So it's about pretty much a square. It's a little bit wider than it is tall, right? And so that would be another aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio is what is the shape of the screen? And then on that screen, the way we get images, and we talked about this before, but I'll just briefly review it. The way we get images is that they're made up of little dots, right? And those little dots are called pixels. And so the number of pixels in your image on your screen is known as your resolution. So 1920 by 1080 is high definition. And that would be, there's 1,920 pixels across, and then there's 1,080 of those rows of 1,920 pixels across, right? So there's 1,080 rows, and each row has 1,920 pixels. And so that's your resolution. You can multiply those numbers together. So 1920 by 1080. You can multiply those numbers together to find out how many pixels are on a screen, right? If your resolution happens to be 1920 by 1080. So there'd be 2,073,600 pixels. Well, then we have our color depth or bit depth. And we Googled this too before, I think. I feel like we're just color depth wiki. And color depth is how many bits, how many binary digits, how many zeros and ones, how many circuits and on-off states are used to represent the color for each pixel. So if we have a color depth of 1, then the pixel can either be black or green or whatever. It could be one of two colors, because with one circuit, one switch, one porch light, we could store two pieces of information. On, come trick or treat, off, go away, right? Or black and green. And so that's, but if we had a color depth of 2, then we could store 4 pieces of information. So if we had a color depth of 24, which would be like, I guess they call it what? True color or something like that. 24 true color, there we go, right? 24 color depth. Then we could store 16 million or something, 777,216 different color variations for each pixel. It could be one of almost 17 million different color variations. And so here you can see 1-bit color. It's one of 2 colors. Here you can see 2-bit color. Here's 4-bit color, right? Here's 8-bit color, and here's 24-bit color, like a lot more nuances in the color. And so you can kind of see right there that leaf is kind of wacky, right? But these get, I guess, better. So that's color depth. And if you do that, then without encryption, when you have, or without encoding, encoding and decoding, without compression and decompression, a codec, you're going to store 49,766,400 on-off states to store that image quality. But you could reduce that by and we definitely talked about this before a little bit, by having some sort of a codec, compression, decompression algorithm. And so that codec might say a little mathematical formula, and it'll say, well, from this pixel to that pixel, it's all the same color. From this pixel to that pixel, it's all this color red. From this pixel to that pixel, it's all that color black. So instead of storing the color information for each pixel, you have a little formula that kind of figures out what the colors that should be stored are, and it remembers it in a mathematical way. And so you could reduce the amount of information that's stored in order to store the information for that picture. And so that's compressing, right? You're compressing from that sort of raw file where it's every pixel, all of the color information for each pixel stored. You're compressing it in some way with a codec, compression, decompression algorithm that can then be decompressed to recreate that picture. And you could also throw away data, right? So there's lossy and lossless compression. And lossy compression is you lose data. It's lossy, you lose it. And lossless is you don't lose data. So you could compress it and then get back to the original state. Lossy is you compress it and you can never go back to the higher resolution quality with lossy. So some of those picture coding schemes, some of those codecs, compression, decompression algorithms for storing picture data are like JPEG, GIF, PNG, BMP, TIFF, and RAW, right? And so those are our compression, decompression algorithms, some of them. And that's what we use to store color data. So those are all for bitmap images, okay? So bitmap images is we're mapping bits to each pixel in some way. And so that's really good for gradations in color, right? So every pixel can be a slightly different color and allows transitions in colors and things like that. Two general categories of images are bitmap is one category where they're like this, and all of these things here, JPEG, GIF, PNG, BMP, TIFF, and RAW are bitmap, and that's great for pictures, images. And then we have another category, two main categories of images, and that other category of images, so one category is bitmap, and then the other category is vector. And vector images are great for drawings and logos. Okay, so vector images are great for drawings and logos. One thing I'll point out about these different compression, decompression algorithms is that PNG is pretty much like the best thing to choose for images when you're saving stuff for a variety of reasons. One, it's equivalent to JPEG. Two, it's open source, whereas JPEG is owned by somebody. And then three, PNG also allows transparency. So you could do stuff like this, right? Where this stuff would all be transparent in the image. So that's a good deal with that. So just like we had codecs for images, vectors, here's a vector image. It doesn't have as good of gradations in color. Other vectors would be like, you could go to, let's just look one more at vectors. You could go to, I don't know, stock photography. And we're Shutterstock. There we go. And then you could search for, instead of photos, we could say, hey, I want vectors. And I want like, heart. And so here are heart vectors, right? Like that's a pretty intricate vector right there. There's some pretty intricate gradations in color. So maybe that would be better almost as an image, but I don't want a real photograph of a heart. So a drawing, I guess, is also good, but could be a picture of a drawing. Like some really interesting hearts here, but these are all created with mathematical formulas. All right, those are vectors. And then we also have, for sound, we also have codecs for sound. And so with audio, we have a sample rate, we have a bit depth, and we have a number of channels, right? So Dolby 5.1 would be 5 channels of sound information, so each speaker could have slightly different sound. Stereo would be 2 channels, right? So each speaker left and right could have different sound. And then the bit depth is how many bits are we using to store the information for each sample. And so the more bits we use, the more choices we have for what that sound could be. If we only used 1 bit, it could be high or low, right? But if we have 24 bits, then we have almost 17 million possible combinations of what that sound could be for each sample. And then a sample rate is how many sounds do we take per second. And that's measured in kilohertz. And a hertz is a frequency, measure of frequency, and kilo is 1,000. And so frequency would be like in 1 second, that's the frequency. How many thousand measurements do we take? And so 41.1 kilohertz, or 41,100 samples a second, is CD quality sound. So that's, again, extraordinarily mind-blowing that, we could store that minuscule, it's just like such precise, minuscule data for 41,100 samples a second. And for each sample, there might be 24 bits of information, which would be a specific sound. And then we could just play that all back flawlessly and seamlessly, and it just sounds like music. Like, blows the mind. So some of the codecs for sound are like MP3 or AAC or M4A or WAVE or WMA. And then it's the same thing with video. So video also is going to have compression, decompression algorithms. And MP4 for video is right, MP3 for sound, MP4 for video is a common video codec. I'm just looking to see if I have any. Yeah, I've got some MP4s over there on my other desktop. And with video, it's the same thing as images, except now we have so many frames per second. And that's what gives us the illusion of motion. The illusion of motion is that, we have many still pictures very similar, and they change, so many times per second, and it looks like something's moving, which it is, when it was recorded. But it's 24 frames per second, 24 still photos per second. That's film, 24 frames per second. TV in North America is 29.97 frames per second. Kind of weird, 29.97. And shooting on YouTube videos, if you want that film kind of quality, shoot at 24 frames per second. And so videos also have compression, decompression algorithms. So that's kind of it for multimedia, just thinking about media and looking at some of the codecs for different types of media. And I like kind of philosophizing about, thinking about like, wow, how information is presented today as opposed to how it was presented in the past, and how readily we are able to consume information today compared to like how slow we were at consuming information in the past, right? Like even the color, right? This is just black and white. And so we added in the dimension of color. Whoa, way more compelling. I mean, just look at those thumbnails, right? Pretty staged and like not framed well. And, I'm not compelled to watch any of that. I'm compelled to watch a lot of this. Right? Like people thought about what the thumbnail is going to be to try to grab user attention. Even the way this web page is laid out, right? Like, wow, it's amazing. You're living really in the best time ever, in the best place ever. You really won. You got the golden ticket. It's an amazing time to be alive. Hey, that's it for this first part. In the next video, we'll talk about chapter 10.